Oh, Canada, you sweet, sweet summer child. A country that is at great risk, my friends. They are responding to Trump's tariffs by increasing their own energy tariffs by 25% on the 1.5 million homes in the U.S. that they provide energy to. This is the new Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, getting in on the plan.
Until these tariffs are off the table, until the threat of tariffs is gone for good, Ontario will not relent.
Uh-oh.
We will not back down, pausing some tariffs, making last-minute exemptions. It won't cut it. We need to end the chaos once and for all. We need to sit down, work together, and land a fair deal. A deal that gives businesses the confidence to invest. A deal that gives workers the security they need and deserve. Until then, Ontario will keep up the fight. We will apply maximum pressure to maximize our leverage. That's why today we're moving forward with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports. For the 1.5 million American homes and businesses that Ontario powers, homes and businesses in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. This surcharge will cost families and businesses in these states up to $400,000 each and every single day. On an average, this will add around $100 per month to the bills of hardworking Americans.
Now talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face. This buffoon, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, is only setting the stage for his country to get wrecked by further retaliatory responses by Donald Trump, who has now promised to double the 25% tariffs of steel and aluminum imports to 50%, and has also announced his intention to drastically raise car tariff imports that are also set to go into effect on April the 2nd. And what do you think the good Premier Doug Ford thinks about a potential increase by Donald Trump or a further retaliation? What do you think he had to say about all of this? Let's watch.
Let me be clear. I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If necessary, if the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely. Believe me when I say I do not want to do this. Really? I feel terrible for the American people because it's not the American people who started this trade war. It's one person who's responsible. That's President Trump. I'd rather be working together. I want to sell the U.S. more energy, more electricity, more critical minerals. I want to make Canada and the United States the richest, most successful, safest, most secure two countries on the planet. But as Premier, my number one job is to protect the people of Ontario and in hand protect the people of Canada. I will do whatever it takes. I will fight like I've never fought before to protect Ontario.
Now, Canada's threats, my friends, amount to nothing more than just a paper tiger. The U.S. effectively has Canada by the short hairs when it comes to any kind of trade war that we want to take seriously. You see, Canada sends approximately 75% of its total exports to the United States. That is roughly 25% of its GDP. By comparison, the U.S. sends only 18% of our exports back to Canada. And worse still for the Canadians, this 18% that we send back to Canada represents less than 2% of our total GDP. The damage that Canada will inflict upon itself with this trade war will be astoundingly higher than it will be for us here in the US by an order of magnitude. And by the way, when it comes to the Canadian steel and aluminum with Trump's 50% increase in tariffs here, it's going to effectively slash Canadian revenues, while US producers will simply pivot to domestic or foreign suppliers with much less notable economic pain than Canada will receive in response of lost income. Now, when it comes to this cheap suit, this Ontario Premier Doug Ford and his threat about cutting off energy to the US entirely, this would obliterate their reputation as a reliable supplier to the US. It's one thing to raise rates, it's another to threaten to cut people's power off. It's just the excuse Donald Trump would need to further slash green environmental energy created by the likes of our wonderfully corrupt EPA that have up until now made it much more cost-effective to just import energy from other places like Canada rather than finish developing our own energy sources. If Donald Trump were to slash the garbage green regulations, it would allow Americans to fully provide ourselves with our own domestic energy, which would effectively cause Canada to lose access to American energy markets permanently. This could cost the Canadian people around $131 billion per year. And by the way, Donald Trump did weigh in on Doug Ford's little threat here. He wrote on Truth Social, he said, "Why would our country allow another country to supply us with electricity, even for a small area? Who made these decisions and why? Uh-oh. And can you imagine Canada stooping so low as to use electricity that so affects the life of innocent people as a bargaining chip and threat? They will pay a financial price for this so big that it will be read about in history books for many years to come." Oopsie doopsie, it seems like I'm on the right path here. The long and the short of it, my friends, Canada is likely going to cave like a wet noodle before long because their economy will be unable to weather such a storm. The US economy, for example, is at $28 trillion in GDP. It dwarfs Canada's $2.2 trillion. We here in the US can easily absorb such tariff-related price hikes from Canada, while Canada, with a population 1/10 the size of us, also has a dramatically less diversified economy. They're not going to have the ability to handle a prolonged trade war and will end up suffering severe unemployment. They're going to get currency depreciation, which we're already starting to see now, and eventually inflation, which would be catastrophic for the Canadian citizens. So all this blustering, all this bloviating from people like Doug Ford is nothing more than just hot air escaping from their facial crevices. The reality is, my friends, the complete capitulation of Canada's leaders is almost an inevitability at this point. Ford faces a re-election next year, and if the U.S. sticks to their doubling of the tariffs, this is going to cost Canada roughly $15 to $20 billion annually in lost exports. And if the U.S. were to, say, target oil and gas with additional tariffs, Canadian households would face soaring energy price hikes, further crippling the Canadian economy. And by the way, while all of this is going on, Canada is also dealing with a China trade war. So the Canadian citizens are going to be facing a grim reality. A prolonged resistance against Donald Trump here will likely crater their economy. Ford at some point is going to cave to U.S. demands. My guess is by summer of this year at the latest, to avoid an acceleration of what will surely be an economic crisis on their hands by that point. And I also want to reiterate this. You shouldn't feel bad for Canada in all of this trade war nonsense. See, aside from Trump's complaints about the drugs flowing across Canadian borders into America as one of the reasons for this most recent tariff battle, Canada has also been ripping off the United States for decades now with their own tariffs, which, by the way, our governments up until now have conveniently pretended not to notice. I want to give you a couple of examples here. Let's talk about dairy, poultry, and eggs. Canada has strict quotas on maximum U.S. imports of these products. Once the number is reached, meaning we sell them a certain amount of products, then Canada imposes massive tariffs on these goods. For example, if we were to sell cheese past the quota amount allowed, they will charge 245% tariff tax, butter 270%, and roughly 300% tax for chicken. This effectively blocks the U.S. companies from reaching millions of potential Canadian customers, as the cost would be simply too high and there'd be no profit in doing so. Meanwhile, the current dairy tariffs on Canada for, say, milk that we charge them is at roughly 16%. And by the way, we also don't limit the supply that Canada can sell to us here in the US, so it is a huge trade imbalance. And then, of course, there is also lumber that Canada rips us off on and has been for some time. Currently, Canada is charging the US a 14.5% tax on wood, while we here in America only charge 8%. And so on and on it goes. Canada is no friend to the US in the matter of free trade. This battle, this tariff war between America and Canada has been a long time coming for their trade unfairness to the US. And now the Trump man is here. The Trump man cometh, and he is exacting retribution for these losses for the US. And Canada, by refusing to trade fairly with the US, is going to pay a heavy price with Donald Trump at the helm. The only real question left, my friends, is how much pain can Canada endure before it folds? In my opinion, it's all just a matter of time.